we doing there? Old Miller, he knows how to pooper scooper. All right, bring them on down. The cars or the tractors. Cars you might as well take first if you want to.
You can go all the way over.
How you doing, Brian? You hanging in there? Good. Yeah. Is that all work going to come through here today?
No. I mean, still got problems with it. That's right.
Basically, send them here, this part can jump off.
Go ahead and bring the cars.
They think it'll be about
There comes one.
Okay.
All right.
Well, here's KC right here to my
We're
left.
going to have 8 tables there. You guys keep up.
Well, you know how it is.
Here at the end.
Politicians, you get paid there at the end? Okay.
We're okay. I fooled them today. I didn't wear my green Dixie. I can't just go, there he is.
We could pick you out with that green shirt on, couldn't we?
Today I'm hiding.
You got to remember this is a live show, so anything could happen. I think this first car is a Model T from, I believe it's Marvin Johansson, and it would be a 1923. Yeah, it's Marv's T. Muscatine, Iowa.
Okay, this feature tractor here coming up here on this side of it, nice green painted. I can tell who did the painting, Dick Buckwald, Dixon, Iowa. This here is the 1935 Hoover tractor, HK, owned by Ann Pele of Wheatland, Iowa. Ann's doing the driving. This is the feature tractor this year.
Okay, this car here is a 1911 auto car. It's owned by Gerald Bristol from Rock Falls, Illinois. And right behind that Uber is Mr. Tall Mater of the TV series. That's Chuck Kelly driving it. Here's a 1915 Model T Runabout, Darrell Jordan from Knoxville, Iowa. A 1943 Huber HK, owned by Dick Buckwald, Marty Huber, Moline, Illinois. 1927 Model T from Solon, Iowa. It's Kristen and Stan
Sharon Popperall.
Popperall, okay. Next car through is a 1930 Model A Delivery. It's the Sater family, driven today by Eugene Bowerbank.
This next 1930 Huber tractor is owned by John Hill from St. Charles, Iowa, and John is the operator.
Bill Hudson from Walcott, Iowa, in a 1935 Auburn Speedster. 1948 Leader, owned and operated by Don and Kathy Jones of Keokuk, Iowa. Here is a 1937 Hudson Terraplane, Bill Hudson, out of Walcott, Iowa.
Next, John, tractor coming up here is the 1951 Ward's tractor owned by Robert Swansburg from Pearl, Iowa, and Robert is the driver.
1956 Ford by Art and Bev Ham out of Winfield, Iowa. Gary Van Dorn from Mount Pleasant in his 1957 Chevrolet.
The next Model K in Wallace here is belongs to my boy and his wife Lori Booker, the Mount Pleasant, Iowa, your director, driven by their son Austin Booker.
1929 Chandler by Jim and Judy Gertis out of Fort Madison, Iowa. Next one here is a 57 Ford T-Bird from Harry and Dolly Howells from New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Next tractor is Marvin Stokel with a Hyder tractor from Tama, Iowa. Harry Dawn, an 1896 replica of the quadricycle, the very first car built. There's a 1918 Model T Ford Lloyd and Laura Bank from Salem, Iowa.
Another one of Stokel's tractors, and first time I think he's had these in here at La Crosse Plow Company. Another one like Marvin Stokel from Tama, Iowa.
Major Watkins from Yarmouth, Iowa in a 1926 Model T. Major is now 96. He has never missed an old Thrasher. Major.
50.
Yeah. This next tractor is a La Crosse owned by Midwest Old Thrashers. Darrell Rainier is the operator. There's a 1964 T-Bird from Don and Kathy Jones, Chukuk, Iowa.
1937 Grand Bradley by Dwight Wells of Blakesburg, Iowa, and Dwight is the operator.
Major Watkins, his daughter drives this, Marjorie. It's a 1930 Model A from Yarmouth, Iowa. 1950 Gibson D, owned and operated by Tom Bouger of Letts, Iowa. The next one here is a 1940 Chevrolet Special Deluxe by Jim Flinspaw out of Fairfield. Then I have a 1928 Model A pickup truck from Springfield, Iowa, John's Electrical Service.
1952, owned by Ken and Marlene Perkins from Bennett, Iowa. Ken is the operator.
1928 Ford Harold and Rosemary Jacobs out of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. 28 was the very last year that the very first year that Ford built a Model A. 1939 General GC, owned and operated by Lowell Wessel of Brownstown, Indiana.
The 6F20 here is in 1935, owned by Carl McRae from Delmar, Iowa, and Carl is the operator.
Warren and Elvis Schultz from Burlington, Iowa, in their 1932 Chevrolet right-hand drive. 32 is the only year they had the louvered hood. 1951 Ford 8N, owned and operated by Paul Martin of Marion, Iowa, with a one-row David Bradley corn picker sold by Sears and Roebuck. 1929 Model A, Bill and Dorothy Brickey from Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1930 Baker tractor here on front, owned by Kenny Logie from Durant, Iowa, and Tony D. Hall is the operator.
29 Ford Lon and Lorraine Herring from Winchester, Kansas. 1953 Shepherd Diesel SD2, owned and operated by Harold Sonny Pace of Muscatine, Iowa. Here's Hey Hiram. It's a 1925 race car. Won the Illinois State Fair. Could run about 60, 70 mile an hour.
1917 Ford T conversion owned by Dick and Alice Grimm of Riverside, Iowa. Matt Grimm is the operator.
1913 Buick Gary Seib out of Donaldson, Iowa. 1923 Ford T conversion owned by Dick Grimm, operated by Dean Yoder of Iowa City, Iowa. By the way, that car is 100 years old.
52. No.
Next one's a 1931 Model A from
The 19, go ahead.
Terry Rue, Iowa City, Iowa.
1924 Ford conversion kit owned by Dean Yoder from Iowa City, Iowa, and Dean's the operator.
Crosley Mosquito, 1943, 13 horsepower from Garros out of Burlington, Iowa.
1960 Cockshot 1900, owned and operated by John Hayer of Eden, New York.
This one's a 52 Crosley Super Sports, 26 and a half horsepower. Phyllis and Dwayne Garrow out of Danville, Iowa.
1953 Alice Chalmers WD owned by Bob Blue from Canton, Illinois. Bob's the operator.
1930 Model A, Wayne and Miriam Terpstra from Holland, Michigan.
1979 Mirror Hill 101, owned and operated by Philip Schmitz of Lawrence, New York, made in England.
1926 Model T, Jim Daw from Montrose, Iowa.
1960 Oliver 880 Standard owned by Frederick Hare from Lawton, New York, and Frederick is the operator.
Here's a 29 Ford Model A, Harold and Beverly Rebling of Fairfield. Got his granddaughter from California.
1957 International 350, owned and operated by Melvin Gipple of New Sharon, Iowa.
1917 Model T Touring, Jim Shaladay from Nevada, Iowa.
1938 Oliver 80 Road Cross owned by Marvin Gipple from Crawfordsville, Iowa, and Marvin is the operator.
22 Ford T Pickup, four-wheel drive, Ron and Teresa Carver family from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Sweet 16 in the back.
1947 Dodge Power Wagon, owned and operated by Clint Dixon of Reynolds, Illinois, with a 1947 Dillinger cordwood saw.
This is a 58 Chevrolet Biscayne, Roger Graber, Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1948 BF Avery owned by Avery Jacobs from New London, Iowa, and Avery's the operator.
I know these cars. This one, first one is a 27 Nash, driven by my son, him and his wife from Rockport, Missouri.
AC B208, owned and operated by Don Matthews of Danville, Iowa.
Another son driving his 27 Dodge Business Coupe from Ottumwa.
1935 Alice Chalmers Case RC owned by Dean Grimm Jr. from Charlotte, Iowa, and Alicia is the operator.
This one's another son, 1930 Studebaker out of Ottumwa, Iowa.
1930 KCC, owned and operated by Dean Grimm Jr. of Charlotte, Iowa.
I bet he's out of gas. 90, we don't have. I think you're out of gas.
You'll never know.
I think he's out of gas. Could you believe that? Here's a Model T Speedster out of Mediapolis, Iowa, Blake and Brian Smith, 1917.
Ad lib.
It's a BF Avery pulling a little tether rake. We don't have a card on it.
There's a 19 Center Door Model T, John Daly from Millington, Illinois. Wonder why they call it a center door. That's why.
Little Ford tractor with a dirt scoop on the back. We don't have a card on him.
Here we got a coal. Is that thing old enough to smoke? Okay, it is. Miss Violet from the Long Branch Saloon.
1929 Rumley Oil Pool 4060 owned by Danny Peterson, a good friend from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Danny is the operator.
Chevrolet Coupe, 1938, Loretta and Steve Smith out of Fort Madison, Iowa. Boy, if you're going to run out of gas, right in front of the grandstand's a good place. 1910 Steers, Dan Peterson from Olds, Iowa.
This picture is a 2040 oil pool owned by Larry Holmes, Carlos of Missouri, and Danny and Kenny Bucket. This is old Sam? Yeah, okay, this is old Sam boat.
Here's another 32 Chevrolet. He's got his air conditioner on in the front. It's a 32 Bob Brenneman from Weaver, Iowa. There again, look at the hood. You can tell that's the only year for the 32. How's your air working?
1923 Rumley Oil Pool 2040, owned by Dan and Ken Buckert of Wausau, Illinois. Jeremy is the operator.
21 Model T truck by the Steve Heisey family here in Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1931 Rumley 6, owned by Merlin and Joyce Schaff from Anita, Iowa, and Merlin is the operator.
Here's a 1967 Dodge straight truck, George and Janet Janik from Washington, Iowa.
1918 Rumley Oil Pool 1630H, owned by Leonard Harvey, operated by Jeff, Ruth, Brian Morrison, and Tom Stater.
Okay. Here's the only one we have here. It's a 1909 Stanley Steamer from the Bob Gertis family out of Burlington, Iowa.
1919 Twin City, owned by Mike Swansburg from Des Moines, Iowa. Mike is the operator.
1925 Twin City 2744, owned by Corey Jackson. Owner Mike Swanberg of Des Moines, Iowa. Operator Corey Jackson.
Okay, this next cat coming up here is 1926 Caterpillar Colt, owned by Charles Winkleson from Salem, Iowa, and Charles is the operator. We're going to have the steam engines now on the far side.
Okay, this is the steam engines, half scale, 65 horsepower case, built in 1978, owned by Dale Boer, Toddville, Iowa, operated by Dale, restored by the Boer family.
This next 1958 Ford coming up here is owned by Darrell Eberhardt from Delmar, Iowa, and Darrell is the operator.
This is a 1983 half-scale advance engine owned by Lester Butterfield of Toddville, Iowa, operated by Kevin, restored by Lester and Kevin.
1950 Formula H, owned by Ty Smith of Delmar, Iowa, operated by Bryce Albert and Tia Smith.
This is a half-scale 16 double-center reeves, owned by Ben and Larry Pittman of Carlton, Illinois, operated by Ben, built by Lawrence Billmeyer.
Now, my next John Deere here is the 1944 John Deere Beam, owned by Stephen Hubble from Muscatine, Iowa, and Stephen is the operator.
This is a half-scale 65 horsepower case built in 1982 by Gerald and Dan Crothers, owned by the Crothers family of Lenox, Iowa, operated by Ryko.
This next tractor is a Titan 1020, 1920.
This is a 2/5 scale freelance steam engine built between 2002 and 2006, owned by Mike Nichols, Fort Madison, operated by Mike.
This next tractor here is the 1919 International, owned by Darrell Brothers of Tipton, Iowa, and Darrell is the operator.
This is a half-scale, the 65 case, built in 1988, owned by Al and Melinda Hussinger of Mount Pleasant, operated by Harrison, Emma, and James and Kenny, steam school students.
1941 Formula H, owned and operated by Nathan Fritz of Burlington, Iowa.
1949 Oliver, owned by Michael Uber from Winfield, Iowa, and Michael's the operator, the Model 66.
The 65 horsepower case is the engine of the year for the steam engine this year, built in 1915, owned by Al and Melinda Husinger of Mount Pleasant, operated by Aaron Williamson and Bob Nesselrode in Des Moines.
1928 case, 2545, owned by Dale and Eileen Taylor of Bloomfield, Iowa. Dale is the operator.
Next John Deere B coming up here in 1939, owned by Milford Kester from Danville, Iowa. Milford is the operator.
This is a 1920 New Hoover, model 1850, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, operated by Alan Doran and Janet Smith.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by Randy Kester of Danville, Iowa.
1946 Farmer B, owned by Dale Taylor from Bloomfield, Iowa. Keith Taylor is the operator.
This is a 1912 Case steamroller owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, operated by Kenny Hansen. You fellows in the John Deere there, go around.
$1941 Farmer H, owned and operated by Rick Taylor of Marion, Iowa.
Is that a
1922 Advanced Rumbly, Universal 18-horse, owned by Dwayne Coonrod, Cedar Rapids, operated by Sean Seabold.
1928 Caterpillar coming up here is owned by the Midwest Old Thrashers, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Nate Graver is the operator.
1936 John Deere B, owned by Jerry and Marcia Garrett of Conesville, Iowa. Jerry is the operator.
1919 20-horsepower Universal Advanced Rumbly, owned by John Johnston of Springville, operated by John, assisted by his lovely wife, and Cole, their child, sitting on the back.
1937 John Deere here, owned by Jerry and Marcia Garrett from Conesville, Iowa, and Jerry and Marcia's the operator.
1918 40-horsepower Case, owned by the Coonrod family at Cedar Rapids, operated by Andrew and Cole. There was a coal epidemic, I think.
No card on this next tractor. It's a Massey Harris 22. It's a nice looking little tractor.
The Wallace coming up here, we don't have a card on it, so
1914 2060 Double Simple Gar Scott, owned by Russell Lamp, Letts, Iowa, operated by Russell and Heather Lamp.
1947 Farmer B, owned and operated by Ron Lawyer family of Morningside, Iowa.
1939 John Deere, owned by Larry and Shirley Bickford from Wapello, Iowa, and Larry and Shirley's the operators.
In 1940 John Deere B, owned by Larry and Shirley Bickford of Wapello, Iowa. Larry is the operator.
Yeah.
$150.
1928 John Deere Model D, owned by Freddie Bride, Roseville, Illinois, and Freddie is the operator.
1919 2175 A.D. Baker, owned by Scott Riley of Marion, assisted by John Stump of Springville, Iowa, and is also pulling an Avery water wagon that Scott restored.
1936 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by the Helfrey family of Wayland, Iowa. Karen Garrett is the operator.
1954 John Deere Model 60, owned by Curtis and Kathy Helfrey from Winfield, Iowa, and Curtis is the operator.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by the Helfrey family of Winfield, Iowa.
This is a 1917 40 horsepower case, operated by Ron Garber and Dave Garber. And this is sort of in memory of Dave's wife. She lost her battle this year with ALS, if you've ever had that, Lou Gehrig's disease. And so this kind of their memory to her.
1935 John Deere Model B, owned by the Helfrey family of Winfield, Iowa, and Wendell Helfrey is the operator.
1935 John Deere B, owned by Larry Derbyshire of Yarmouth, Iowa. Jordan Steffener is the operator.
1909 9 horsepower JI case, owned by Joe Gilbert of Sterling, Illinois, operated and restored by the same.
1952 John Deere, owned by Larry Derbyshire of Yarmouth, Iowa. Larry is the operator.
1959 John Deere 630, owned and operated by Gary Johnson of Winfield, Iowa.
1959 John Deere Model 720, owned by Gary Johnson of Winfield, Iowa, and Gary's the operator.
1916 Avery, owned by Jerry Reese of DeWitt, Iowa, operated by Jerry, Erwin, and Alan and Wade Smith did the restoring.
1920 International 1530, owned by Midwest Old Thrashers. Eric is operating it.
1902 New Giant, operated owned by Wayne Kennedy of Danville, operated by Charlie Starkley of Republic, Missouri, and Wayne.
I see Keith keeping cool here with his little hat on. It's 1951 Case DC, owned by Eric and Kelly Hospital from Charlotte, Iowa, and Eric is the operator.
This is Avery Undermouth, and that fella, he didn't turn in a card. Shame on you.
1945 Alice Chalmers WC, owned and operated by Dean Crable of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
247.
You're going to do better next time, Mr. Sigafus.
1959 Oliver 7701 model, owned by Warren Beckman from Don't Have a Town. Warren is the operator.
1923 75 horsepower case, owned by Midwest Old Thrashers, operated by Andy Retro, assisted by Jack Siddall.
1946 Oliver 60, owned by Dwight and Anna Copeland of Fairfield, Iowa. Jacob Copeland from Pella, Iowa is the operator.
Next year's feature.
This is also going to be the next year's 2014 feature tractor.
1954 Alice Chalmers WD-45, owned by Larry Wagner from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Larry is the operator.
1916 40 horsepower case, owned by Roland Van Mark of Pella, Iowa, operated by Roland, and restored by the Van Mark families.
1940 ACG, owned and operated by Leon McCunlin of Martinsville, Illinois.
1951 Ford ADM, owned by Courtney Bates from Washington, Iowa, and Courtney is the operator.
And her husband Mike, or her father Mike, is on the back. I've known you people too long to get that confused.
The 1947 Formula A, owned by Chuck Peck of Wayland, Iowa. Mary Lou is the operator.
All right.
1917 16 double simple Reeves, owned by the J.P. Gallagher family of Piper City, Illinois, operated by Johnny and Courtney Gallagher.
Two, sir. Two right here.
1960 International Cub Cadet, owned by Kenneth Paul of Brighton, Iowa, and Kenneth is the operator.
'54 Formal Cub, owned by Amanda and Larry Osterkamp of Amanda, Iowa. Larry's the operator.
A 1913 20-horsepower return flew Avery, owned by Jeff and Charlize Ruth of Rogersville, Missouri, operated by Jeff and Emily Harley.
1937 Formal F-30, owned by Gene Ayers from Elwood, Iowa, and Gene is the operator.
1886 12-horsepower case, owned by Tom Sadler of Mount Pleasant, operated by Brian Warsaw of Donaldson, Iowa, and Ed Carter of Willard, Missouri.
1941 Formula M, owned and operated by Mike Ellers of Scotch Grove, Iowa.
1944 Formal Model B, owned by Gary Ehlers from Grand Mounds, Iowa, and Gary's the operator.
1947 Formula M High Crop, owned by Gene and Nathan Ellers of Elwood, Iowa. Bill Brower is the operator.
(1951) Formal M, owned by Don Raymer, I got a sticker right on it, and of Davenport, Iowa. Don is the operator.
1952 Formula Super C, owned and operated by Tyler Rinkemerskirch of Davenport, Iowa.
This is an 1890 Giant, owned by Mike Parker, Libertyville, Iowa, operated by Rob Chain Drive Nelson.
1947 Formula H, owned by David Van Sant from Mystic, Iowa, and David is the operator.
You see a couple of these steam engines with the seats up on the front. It was against the law to run an engine down the road by itself, so they had to have horses on the front, so that was a place for the driver and the horses to sit.
No card on the next little Formal Cub. It's a cute little white tractor.
1913 12-horsepower Russell, owned by Sharon Davis. Jerry Fricky is
1957.
And Jerry Fricky of Winfield. Sharon Davis is sailing, operated by Bill Perrinat and David Berry.
Another little Cub here, got a little belly mower underneath of it, don't have a card on it.
1885 6-horsepower Nickel Shepherd, owned by Sharon Davis of Salem, Iowa, operated by John Burrington and Tom Masters.
(1955) John Deere Model 70, owned by Marlene Reed, New London, Iowa, and Marlene's the operator.
In 1908, one is 75-horsepower Montana Special Case, owned by Nick Foster, Jefferson, Iowa, operated by Nick Foster and Bob Stevens.
1955 John Deere 50, owned and operated by Marlene Reed of New London, Iowa.
1952 John Deere. AR owned by Joe Lounsbury from New London, Iowa. Joe's the operator.
1955 John Deere 50, owned by Marlene Reed of New London, Iowa.
1910 110 horsepower case, owned by Old Thrashers, operated by Eric Douglas. Any of the engines with a star on the front like that one? If you want to go for a ride, just ask them and they will take you. No money spent.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by Roger Schaefer of Birmingham, Iowa.
1935 Farmall F12, owned by Gary Lee Morse from Montezuma, Iowa, and Gary Lee's the operator.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by John and Don Butler of Marion, Iowa. Don is the operator.
1939 Farmall F20, owned by Don and Don Butler of Marion, Iowa, and John is the operator.
1949 Case SC, owned and operated by Ken Klopp of Danville, Iowa.
1937 Oliver Hart Par 70, owned by Roy and Sharon Bowers of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Roy and Sharon's the operators.
A 1908 30 horsepower Colleen, owned by Larry Nelson of Muscatine, operated by the Gator.
1939 Oliver 70, owned by the Book family of Madrid, Iowa. Jim Bookie is the operator.
1963 John Deere 1010 Special, owned by the Bucket Farms of Hamilton, Illinois, and Austin Bucket, Mount Pleasant, and Jeremy Bucket of Hamilton, the drivers.
1946 Massey Harris 101 Jr., owned by Tim and Connie Pace of Muscatine, Iowa. Tim is the operator. Do you want me to say the other one?
1952 Massey Harris 44, owned by Twyla Lamack from Wilton, Iowa, and Twyla is the operator with the three-bottom plow.
A 1950 Massey Harris 44 Standard Diesel, owned and operated by Herbert Lamock of Wilton, Iowa.
A 1905 18 horsepower Colleen, owned by Larry Nelson of Muscatine, operated by Larry. What's Bo walking for?
1930 Massey Harris 30, owned by Herbert Lamack, Wilton, Iowa, and Tom Hurst is the operator.
1952 John Deere B&H, owned and operated by Fred Yensick of Muscatine, Iowa.
1953 Massey Harris 55 LP, owned by Howard Dobbins of Durant, Iowa, and Howard is the operator.
1946 Massey Harris 102, owned and operated by Glenda Dobbins of Durant, Iowa.
1952 Oliver 77, owned by Walter Mullins, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Walter's the operator.
These guys go on tractor rides. That's what the extra seats are for, so the wife can tell them where to go.
1961 Massey Ferguson 65, owned and operated by Gail Fisher of Villisca, Iowa.
A 1905 16 horsepower Russell, owned by the Ballard family of Little York, Illinois, operated by Mr. Jeff Ballard himself.
The one and only Jeff Ballard. You can see why they quit. 1950 John Deere A, owned by Mary Griffiths from Libertyville, Iowa. Mary driving, it says.
No card on the next John Deere G.
Ed Segerman. Ed Segerman.
Ed Segerman, is that right?
60, it's a half-scale model 65 case, and I couldn't read the number on the front, so, but that's the family, you can tell.
No card on the Farmall H.
It's got to be a 53.
1953.
Alice Chalmers WD 45, the seat in the back, owned by Marvin Johnson from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Marvin's the operator.
Was an 1894 13 horsepower nickel Shepherd owned by Aaron Bixler of Mount Pleasant, operated by Aaron, assisted by his mother Mary, and his daughter is riding on the rear.
The 1948 Ford 8N, owned and operated by Bill McCogan of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1947 Ford 2N, owned by Dennis Brooks from Ames, Iowa, and Dennis is the operator.
Yeah.
No card on the next Farmall F12. About 36? 37.
1920 20 horsepower Advanced Rumbler owned by the Deere family of Palmyra, Missouri, operated by Bradley and Riley Deere, restored by John and Brad, and I see where you changed it.
1936 John Deere Model B, owned by Alan Duran from Boone, Iowa, and Allison is the operator.
No card on the Oliver 70, about 1936.
1940 John Deere Model L, owned by Carl Wickham from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Carl's the operator.
1937 25 horsepower Kitten owned by Michelle McClure, Colchester, Illinois, operated by Michelle.
1953 Alice Chalmers WD 45, owned and operated by Earl Swigert of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
Well, I better add that Samantha is on there also.
Looks like a 54th anniversary, is that right?
1936 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Kevin Clark of Wayland, Iowa, and Dan Mott is the operator.
1910 30 horsepower Huber owned by Leroy McClure of Colchester, Illinois, operated by Kevin Hanley and Chucky Lane, who couldn't find his billfold. Oh, Squeaky's there too? Whoa. You got all kinds of help there, Kevin.
Yeah.
1948 Ford 8N, owned by Ermedine Beaujard of Wayland, Iowa. And that's not Ermedine driving.
In 1912, 32 horsepower cross compound Reeves, owned by Midwest Old Thrashers, operated by Mike Borders and Drew Schumacher.
1934 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Robert Crable from Uniontown, Ohio, and Robert is the operator over here from Uniontown.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by Dustin Yates of Waterloo, Iowa.
This is a 60 horsepower case owned by Kenny Heffaker of Mount Pleasant, operated by Mike Sepp and Kenny, restored by Leon and Kenny. Mike couldn't think of the year.
This is a Montgomery Ward's tractor. It's a twin row, owned by George Janacek from Washington, Iowa, and George is the operator.
1959 John Deere 630, owned and operated by Dean Wilson of Washington, Iowa.
1954 M&M ZB is owned by Gail Whitaker from Washington, Iowa, and Gail is the operator.
Cigar Scott with no card, but it's owned by the Wall family of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, with John Jr. and Mary on the rear end there.
The 1962 Minneapolis Moline Jetstar, owned and operated by Merle Pasha, Washington, Iowa.
1954 Farmall MTA, owned by Larry Myers of Wayland, Iowa, and Larry is the operator.
No card on the little 1948 8M.
1905 Kelly Springfield 12-ton roller, owned by Gene and Dave Verse of Centennial, Colorado, and the Herrick family of Mount Pleasant, operated by Russell Herrick and Dave Verse.
No card on the little John Deere B.
No card on the WC Alice Chalmer here in front. That's Jerry Weaver.
20 horsepower Reeves engine with a 20 horsepower Russell boiler, owned by Earl and Dana DeReese of Severna Park, Maryland, operated by the DeReese family.
What? 5:30.
1957 M&M 335, owned by Wendell and Sharon Berger from Pleasant Hill, Iowa, and Wendell is the operator.
1941 Formula H, owned and operated by David Fuller of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
Uh, 1917 22 horsepower Woods Brothers, owned by Tooney Melcher of Cedar Rapids, operated by Clint Welch and Pub Melcher.
1958 John Deere Model 820, owned by Mike Flagg from Fairfield, Iowa, and Mike is the operator.
1964 Model Rumbly 5-horse, owned by Tooney Melcher of Cedar Rapids, operated by the wonderful Sarah Melcher.
A 1946 Farmel C, owned by Darrell Wiggin of Drakesville, Iowa. Darrell is the operator.
1953 Mazda Model 33, owned by Nate Pepper from Brighton, Iowa, and Nathan is the operator.
1953 Farmel Super W6, owned and operated by David Wiggin of Drakesville, Iowa.
1936 Farmel F20, owned by Scott and Larry Lynn from Ackworth, Iowa, and Scott is the operator.
1916 2070 Nickel Shepherd, owned by Old Thrashers, operated by Dale Fuller and Joyce Hoffmaster of Dayton, Ohio.
1952 IH Super A, owned and operated by Lynn Douglas of Edina, Missouri, with a Ballymore.
19 1930 Farmville Regular, owned by Dan Bessler from Pelly, Iowa, and Dan was the operator.
1958 International Harvester 650D, owned and operated by Mac Dillon of Albia, Iowa.
1958 International Harvester, owned by Matt Galen from Albia, Iowa. Matt is the operator.
22 horsepower Wood Brothers, owned by Frank and Annie Tharp of Albia, Iowa, operated by Frank.
19.
And this is a Russell who is operated by Mr. Whitey, and Mr. Whitey did not put a card in today.
It's John Deere 70 diesel out here in front. It is owned by Daniel Walker of Albia, Iowa, and Daniel is the operator.
1952 Case DC, owned and operated by Wade Fisher of Winfield, Iowa.
A 1917 1965 horsepower Fort Huron road engine owned by Rob Nelson and Richard Downs of Lockridge, operated by Jacob, and Laura and Piper are in there also.
1947 Farmville Model B, owned by Luann and Todd Fisher from Winfield, Iowa, and Luann is the operator.
1951 Massey Harris 44, owned and operated by Dean Van Ness of Danville, Iowa.
1953 Massey Harris 44, owned by Edward Smith of Salem, Iowa, and Edward is the operator.
A 1920 20 horsepower Minneapolis, owned by Kenton and Logan Sutton of Seward, Nebraska, operated by Kenton.
1953 Alice Chalmers WD-45, owned and operated by Gerald Martin of New London, Iowa.
1954 Dayton, owned by Lee Eberton son from Mount Pleasant, and Lee's the operator.
This is 1914 20 horsepower Harrison Jumbo, owned by Leroy McClure of Colchester, Illinois, operated by Bob Jacoby, assisted by Leroy.
1935 Alice Chalmers WC, owned and operated by Daniel Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1934 Nancy Harris 1220, owned by Danny Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Danny's on the next one here.
1928 Wallace 2030, owned by Daniel Peterson of Mount Pleasant, and this tractor Daniel is driving.
This is a 2009 model, 5/8 scale Wood Brothers, built by Tom Nichols of Eldon, Iowa, and John Shepard of Bloomfield, Iowa, operated by Tom.
1935 Alice Chalmers Hugh, owned by Danny Peterson, Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1947 Massey Harris 44-6, owned and operated by Dale Loving of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And it's not Dale. Dave? Okay.
1947 Massey Harris Model 55, owned by Jason Loving from New London, Iowa, and Jason's the operator.
A 1912 20-horsepower Wood Brothers owned by Mel and Judy Kerr of Macomb, Illinois, operated by Matt Berkey.
A 1945 John Deere BR, owned and operated by Ron Van Sant of Oskaloosa, Iowa.
1926 Case Model 1220 Cross Motor, owned by David Van Sant of Harvey, Illinois, Iowa, and David is the operator.
1919 20-horsepower Advanced Rumley, owned by Penny and Bob Gilchrist of Whittier, Iowa, operated by Bob Gilchrist and John Johnson of Springville, Iowa.
1938 Allis-Chalmers WC, owned and operated by Robert and Deb Vanden Hughes of Pleasantville, Iowa.
1959 Farmers 460 Diesel, owned by Alan Lucas from Washington, Iowa, and Ron Lucas is the operator.
Well, Advanced Rumley just went by. It just arrived here from Texas about 3 weeks ago. So Bob just purchased it. This is a 1914 18-horsepower Woods Brothers. That's also owned by Penny and Bob Gilchrist of Whittier, operated by Mike Ebert.
1957 Farmall Cub, owned and operated by Bernie Loft of Hardin, Illinois.
Big.
1951 Ferguson 2020, owned by Ernie Loft from Kirksville, Missouri. Ernie is the operator.
A 1941 Ford 9N, owned by Richard Bloomquist of Fairfield, Iowa.
1914 20-horsepower Case Short Boiler, owned by Penny and Bob Gilchrist of Whittier. Mike Rody and his daughter are the operator of it.
1949 John Deere Model B, owned by Steve Bickle from Fairfield, Iowa, and Steve is the operator.
1920 1965 horsepower Port Huron, owned by Penny and Bob Gilchrist of Whittier, operated by Wyatt Llewellyn of Perry, Missouri.
1939 B John Deere, owned by Steve and Don Beekle of Fairfield, Iowa.
1954 Farmer Super MTA, owned by Aaron Sheets, Stockport, Iowa, and Aaron is the operator.
A 1950 John Deere B, owned and operated by Mike Flagg of Fairfield, Iowa.
1909 75 horsepower Case, owned by Bob Gertis family, Burlington, Iowa, operated by Vicki Gertis, engineered by Jeff Johnson, and Mr. Bob's riding herd over the whole bunch.
1944 John Deere Model A, owned by Maynard Hanson from Willett, Iowa, and Maynard is the operator.
Next tractor is a John Deere Diesel 70, Dan Holstein of Wapello, Iowa.
1949 Minneapolis Moline U, owned by Anthony Proctor from Mount Unionville, Iowa, and Anthony is the operator.
A 1949 Ford 8N Modified, owned and operated by Terry Proctor of Unionville, Iowa.
A 1910 16 horsepower Gar Scott, owned by Nelson Smith of Brighton, operated by Del Meeks of Rainville, Ohio.
1941 John Deere Model A, owned by Jerry Janchak from Defiance, Iowa, Missouri, and Jerry's the operator.
(1958) John Deere 630, owned and operated by Howard Smith of Birmingham, Iowa. So you got a license for that tractor?
1941 M&M RTU, two-bottom tractor, owned by Bob Bussell from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Bob is the operator.
(1950) Oliver 77, owned by Floyd Schaefer of Fairfield, Iowa. Gail Schaefer is the operator.
BAC.
1952 case of VAC, owned by Floyd Schaefer of Fairfield, Iowa, and Joe Schaefer is the operator.
1948 ACWC, owned and operated by Ron Bauer of Fairfield, Iowa.
1934 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Ronald Bauer of Fairfield, Iowa, and Ronald is the operator.
(1957) John Deere 620, owned and operated by Ron Bauer of Fairfield, Iowa.
1957 John Deere 620, Ronald Bauer of Fairfield is the owner.
1959 John Deere 630, owned and operated by Walt Church of Salem, Iowa.
1952 John Deere Model A, owned by Walter Church of Salem, Iowa, and Canton Church is the operator.
1944 John Deere B, owned and operated by John Green of Burlington, Iowa.
1937 Farmall F20, owned by Don Northup of West Burlington, Iowa, and Don is the operator.
This road locomotive is a nickel shepherd boiler with a raised two-cylinder undermount. It was built in the 50s by Warren Coonrod, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, operated by Lester Butterfield, Kevin, everybody else, and there's Tommy's daughter even.
1928 Hartport 1836, operated by Ron Rice, about West Burlington, Iowa. Window Stoll Thrashers is the owner.
1952 Oliver 77, owned by George Zenzer from Solon, Iowa, and George is the operator.
1958 John Deere 520, owned and operated by Jim Michael of Waunakee, Wisconsin.
1941 John Deere HM, owned by Fred and Helen Lobb from Coralville, Iowa, and Fred is the operator.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by Larry Michael of West Branch, Iowa.
1956 John Deere Model 60, owned by Jerry Michaels from West Branch, Iowa. Jerry's the operator.
1939 John Deere B, owned by Lloyd Bank of Salem, Iowa. Jim Shellady is the operator. This was purchased by his grandfather.
1949 Alice Chalmers Model C, owned by Sean Michael from Norway, Iowa, and Sean is the operator.
The 1954 ACWD 45, owned and operated by Susan Morgan of Lone Tree, Iowa.
1958 Alice Chalmers CA, owned by Brian Busser of Nichols, Iowa, and Brian is the operator.
1958 Farmall 560, owned and operated by Dan Busser of Lone Tree, Iowa.
Okay, this engine down here at the west end is an 1882 Harrison traction engine. It's the only one left of its kind in the whole wide world. But it's owned by Steve Kuntz of Valley Park, Missouri. It's operated by Steve, but it's got chain drive. Needless to say, that don't always happen. So anyway, we got a tractor coming to rescue it, and last year he couldn't make it. He fell off of a 20-foot ladder and broke both ankles. So he's back this year, but that's where he sits. So I thank you, everybody, for coming to the steam engine part. Tractors, more to come.
Thank you, DC. 1957 Formo Cub Lowboy, owned by Robert Brusser of Nichols, Iowa, and Robert is the operator.
1942 Formo B, owned and operated by Kurt Scarrow of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1951 Formo MD, owned by Charles and Bill McComber from Cascade, Iowa, and Charles Bill is the operator.
Pulling a 1927 McCormick Darren 1020, operated by Nancy McCormick of Cascade.
1958 Alice Chalmers D17, owned by Brian and Ron Tagler from Fairfield, and Brian Tagler is the operator.
We have no card on the little Alice Chalmers G with a one bottom plow.
1958 Alice Chalmers Model B, owned by Brian Tagler from Fairfield, Iowa, and Courtney is the operator.
1960 Alice Chalmers D17 diesel, owned and operated by Brandon Tagler of Fairfield, Iowa.
Got a little 40 John Deere, we don't have a number on it.
1952 Farmer Lamb, owned and operated by Brian Howell of New London, Iowa.
1935 McCormick Daring, Jack Stewart Sr. from Wellman, Iowa, with an 012. Jody is the operator.
1935 McCormick Daring 012 Orchard, owned and operated by Jim Seward of Wellman, Iowa.
1954 John Deere 70, owned by John Mayberry from Bloomfield, Iowa, and John is the operator.
1948 Ford 8N, owned and operated by Keith Trafton of Ruffalo, Iowa, with rear-mounted loader.
1950 John Deere Model B, owned by Matthew Dean of Burlington, Iowa, and Matthew Dean is the operator.
1951 John Deere A, owned and operated by Matthew Dean of Burlington, Iowa. 1956 Ferguson F40, owned and operated by Willis Biddle of Fairfield, Iowa.
1950 Formo H, owned by Gary Sparks of Fairfield, Iowa, and Gary's the operator.
1960 Ford 641 diesel, owned and operated by G. Bell Mulligan of Packwood, Iowa.
1943 John Deere Model B, owned by Tom Busher from Letfa, Iowa, and Tom is the operator.
We have no card on the John Deere A.
817.
1950, Minneapolis Moline U on the far side, owned by our good friend James Taylor from Fairfield, Iowa, and James is the operator.
1954 Minneapolis Moline ZB, owned and operated by James Taylor of Fairfield, Iowa.
1936 John Deere Model A, owned by the Midwest Old Thrashers, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It's got a number 25 picker. Charlie Grayhouse is the operator.
1949 Funnel M, owned and operated by John Morrison of Pasco, Illinois.
1939 Sears Roebuck, Econo, owned by John Boone from Appleton.
1936 Eagle, owned and operated by Steve Tolander of Swedesburg, Iowa.
The Panzer garden tractor, lawn tractor owned by Harold Salmons, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Harold is the operator.
1954 Copar Panzer, owned and operated by Harold Salmons of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
892. 1962 Mustang lawn tractor, owned by Howard Salmons of Mount Pleasant, and Ethan Graver is the operator.
1960 Science and Mechanics Power and Pup, owned and operated by Donald Luke of Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
What's the number on that? Can you see that one? 849.
A 1972 John Deere 140, owned and operated by Spencer Quick of Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
1968 Ford, owned by Jenkins Antiques of Hamilton, Illinois. It's a Model 120, Clayton Jenkins, the operator.
Custom 640, owned and operated by Mark Roy of Keokuk, Iowa. Roy Rather?
948. Got that one.
1969 John Deere 110 lawn tractor, owned by Austin Booker, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Austin is the operator, right up there with the white John Deere.
1966 Case 130 lawnmower, owned by the Bucker Farms of Wausau, Illinois, and Jeremy is the operator.
42. Montgomery Ward.
1967 Montgomery Ward, owned by Eddie Ward, a good friend from, well, he's in Bates City, Missouri, outside of Kansas City. And Eddie Ward is the operator. Got a brand new mower there that's 1968, never been used.
1971 Case 220, owned and operated by Tyler and Aiden Clemens of Clarence, Iowa. And I believe that concludes our Cavalcade of Power for today.
Well, thank you all for staying here. Well, we did it in pretty good time. An hour and a half. Don't know how many tractors we run through, probably half of them maybe. I think they said they had right at 800 tractors over here, so there's a lot of them to look at, a lot of things to do yet. It's just the first day of the Midwest Old Thrashers here at Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And I want to thank, you got anything to say?
Tractor pull tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Also Saturday morning, 9 o'clock?
Saturday morning too. Yep.
So,
I'm done.
you're done, huh? All right. This concludes the parade for the first day here at the Midwest Old Thrashers. Thank you.
Oh.
Again, we do have a car or a pickup parked in the Armory parking lot. It's a silver Chevrolet, license plate 604JWW from Loiza County. It needs to be moved. You're in the fire lane. Chris Heaton, our steam director, is down on the track there. Is he looking to trade that for a gas tractor right about now? Even up trade, there you go. Chris does a lot of work around the showgrounds here. He's the president of Midwest Old Threshers. If you have any questions, be sure to stop down and talk to Chris. His son's been out helping him, getting him involved in steam area also. Every once in a while we have one of these break down. That's no big deal. Gives guys something to work on. Again, we'll be having a concert tonight, so we encourage everybody to come back to that. There'll be demonstrations with the horses, the steam engines, the tractors. So just enjoy your day here at Midwest Old Threshers.
I'm Fred Buckert, Alan's dad. I want to thank the board here at Midwest Old Threshers for putting up for us. I've been coming up here for, gosh, I don't know how many years, probably 1960, long in there. We've been here pretty regular, and like I said, nice people around here have been, all the directors I've had contact with have really been nice, and I want to thank them. Anytime you go down to Norway, I stop in at the Western Illinois Threshers, Hamilton, Illinois. But you've got one of the greatest right here in Mount Pleasant. Thank you. Yeah, I don't want that around here. Good job. Thank you. Very good.